Hi, everybody. Welcome to MoreBeer's Deluxe Homebrew Starter Kit Demonstration. My name is David Wonder. I'm the sales director at MoreBeer here. I've been teaching home and pro brewers how to brew for over 10 years now. And I'm here today with Vito DeLucci.
Hey, everybody. Nice to virtually meet you.
So he's going to be leading us through this brew today. Vito is an incredible brewer. He's been home brewing for over 11 years now. He's won many medals and awards. And he's also the head brewer at Imperial in Brentwood, California here. So I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and there's going to be 4 breakout points throughout this video to answer those questions. So don't hesitate to just ask those questions and, just go ahead and chat them right into the chat. And then I'll get to them, during those points. So, so Vito, you ready to lead us through this journey today?
I'm ready. Hopefully everybody's ready to get going. Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. Congratulations, everybody, on your purchase of the Beer Kit 300. I started brewing myself on a kit just like this. So it's just a great way to start. Today, we'll be going through the entire brew process, or brew day, from grain to glass in basically under an hour. But this whole day takes a little bit longer than that. So let's go over a couple things before we get started. First off, cleaning and sanitation. That is the key to making great beer. So be sure to thoroughly clean your equipment before and after your brew day, and as well sanitize anything that comes in contact. For that, we've got 2 products that come with your kit. Star San is what we use for sanitizing, and for cleaning, we use these tablets here. So make sure you do that. So once you unbox everything, we're going to want to make sure we rinse it, thoroughly clean it. Don't need to sanitize at that point, but once we get into brewing, we're going to want to sanitize. So let's go ahead and dig into it. I brewed a couple weeks ago, and we recorded everything. So I'll go through the steps, and then we'll watch a video. So follow along, get your instruction sheet here. We're going to go through all of the different steps for making beer. So the first step we're going to do is collect our water. So in our kettle here, we're going to collect 6 gallons of water. The nice thing is there's the markers inside there, so you can see clearly where that is. Let's talk about water real quick. Use good water. If your water in your house is good enough to drink, then it's good enough to brew with. If you don't like drinking your tap water, then maybe go pick some up from the store. So go ahead and fill that up. We're not going to use this lid at this point. It's great later on when we want to, when we're cooling everything. So just go ahead and put the lid to the side for now. We're going to collect the water. We're going to first turn on, so start on high heat. It's going to take a while to heat up that water. And most stovetops, it's going to take at least 30 to 45 minutes. So we'll start it on high heat, and then we're going to add our steeping grain. That's our first step right here. So there's your steeping grain, and then you've got the bag here as well. So we're going to add the grain inside the bag, let it sit in there just like we're making tea essentially. Let it sit. Again, we want it to take at least 30 minutes. Your kit also came with a thermometer, so take readings along the way, because we don't want to go over 170 degrees. At that point, we're going to extract what we call tannins from the grain, and it's kind of bitterness. So we don't want to do that. So make sure at least takes 30 minutes, and then we don't want to exceed 170 degrees. Then we're going to go ahead and pull out the bag, let it drain. Don't squeeze it. Again, we don't want to extract those tannins, and we also don't want to burn ourselves. It's at 170 degrees, so we just want to be careful and cognizant of that. So let's go ahead and cut to a video, and we can see everything I just talked about. Awesome. All right. So we've removed our grain bag. We've set that aside. We're going to go ahead and let it heat up. We're trying to get to a good rolling boil before we add the malt extract. So this could take another 20 minutes or so, depending on your stovetop. Once we see a good rolling boil there, then we're going to add our malt extract. First step for that is to first turn off your flame. Make sure the flame's off. This is, a caramel type solution, so it's going to want to, it's heavier than water. It's going to want to go to the bottom and sit down there, and we just don't want to scorch it. So make sure you turn off the flame when you're doing that, and then go ahead. It's got a peel tab. You can rip that off, and then give it a nice little swirl as you're adding it. We're trying to get all this this liquid malt extract to make its way into the water. So swirl it, just like toothpaste too. Go ahead and kind of squeeze the bag, get all of it out of there. We want to make sure we get all this good sugar out of there. Once we've done that, then we're going to turn the heat back on. Again, make sure we've mixed it. All that liquid malt extract has made its way into water. We're going to turn the heat back on. So we've added about 7 pounds of something that was room temperature. So you probably, you're at a boil. Now we're probably down to 190 degrees. So it's going to take a little time to get back up to temperature. So give it that time. Again, go for that rolling boil. We'll see a video to see what a rolling boil looks like. Once you're at a rolling boil, that's when we can go ahead and start adding our hops. Also, don't walk away from, it's boring watching a boiling kettle, but don't walk away because there's going to be something called the hot break. What that is all the proteins and hops are going to want to, make their way up to the top. If you see that happening, and it will happen, go ahead, give it a stir, turn the flame down a little. Once it does it, it's not going to happen again, or generally. So, but watch for that hot break. Once we've done that, again, also don't cover the kettle. We want to let all of the volatiles make their way out. We're not trying to keep any of that in. There's things that are produced during a boil with grain, and we want to let all those out. So then we're going to add our bittering hops. So after the hot break, we're going to add our bittering hops again. We've got, your kit came with another one of these bags, so we'll be using one of these bags. And here's your hops. So simply, again, pull tab, put them in the bag, tie it off to the side, because we're going to want to leave these hops inside there for the entirety of the boil. This kit, there's a couple additions. So this first one is going to be the 60-minute edition. We're going to be boiling for 60 minutes, so that's going to be your total boil time. Add that in, set your timer, keep an eye on it, don't walk away. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like in the video. All right, let's take our first Q&A break. Do we have any questions?
Sure do, Vito.
Awesome.
So we got one question here. Can you cover the boil kettle to get it to boil faster?
You can, and at that first, when you're steeping your grains, that's okay if we're trying to speed it up. But once we're in a boil and we've added, especially after you've added your malt extract, that's when we do not want to cover it, because we want to let everything boil off. We're actually trying to reduce the total volume a little. We started with 6 gallons, but we're going to finish with about 5.5 to 5 gallons. So you could use it in the beginning. The reason I say, I just want to make sure we go over to not do that in the boil. So that's why I kind of reiterated that a couple times. But you totally can initially if we're trying to speed up that getting to a boil from that first 30 minutes.
And you got to be careful, right? If you put the lid on and you're not kind of watching.
That is true too. So once you have a lid on there, the pressure has nowhere to go. So it's going to heat a lot faster. So, you need to be careful on that for sure.
For sure.
Great question.
So then we got another good question. Are the hops supposed to float to the top?
Yes, initially they're going to float. So, that's in this setup, I recommend using the bag to keep them. They will kind of want to float over to the side like this and make their way up to the top. You can kind of hit them down every once in a while with the spoon, make sure they're getting into solution. With that first hop, what those are is bittering hops. So we've got bittering hops and aroma hops in this kit. So we want to get those alpha acids out of or into solution. Sorry. So yeah, they're going to want to float to the top. Just kind of kick them down. You don't have to worry about it too much. That the act of boiling is going to create a convection, which is going to get a good mixture.
Yeah, not something to worry about.
Not something to worry about. Yeah.
Exactly. Then we got another one here. Will you talk about making beer with an all grain kit today?
No, today we're going to cover just the extract kit, but we could talk a little bit about that at the end. I want to go over everything in the extract, and our customer service team, myself, Dave, we're here. I love to talk. I mean, that's what I do at the brewery is all grain brewing. So shoot me an email,
and hopefully that's one of our next videos, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're doing an all grain brewing video too.
Yeah, I think it's probably something we can touch on.
Brewing. Sorry.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions we got for now, Vito.
Awesome. Let's keep going. All right. So we've set our boil timer. We've got our first hop addition in there. Right now is a good use of your downtime is to make your sanitizer. So we're going to use our Star San again, and we're going to make a sanitizing solution. We're going to use 1 ounce of Star San for 5 gallons of water. Some things to note about Star San is you need at least 1 minute contact time for it to do its job. So whatever you're sanitizing, make sure that you leave it in there for at least 1 minute. We can make it in the bucket. I like to make it in my fermenter here, and then run through the spigot into a bucket. Keep it around because we're gonna use it again. We're gonna want to sanitize the tubing. So you can go through the spigot here, through the tubing, keep it in the bucket, and you'll have some sanitizer around. You can even put it in a spray bottle and use it for that day. Make sure you make a new batch every time, though. It's not something you could leave in the spray bottle for a couple days at a time. So we make some sanitizer. The next thing we're going to want to do with at least 20 minutes left in the boil. So your kit came with a wort chiller. It's an immersion chiller. So we're going to put it in the boil kettle. We're going to want to put it in the boil kettle with about 20 minutes left in the boil. That's going to sanitize the wort chiller itself. Your first use, you hadn't ran any water through this, so nothing to worry about. But the second, the third time you use it, there's going to be some residual water left inside the wort chiller. So make sure, just do this every time. Make sure the output of the one that doesn't hook up to the hose is going down a drain or in a bucket, because what's going to come out of there is boiling hot water and or steam if there's some residual water from that last one. So put your wort chiller in there. Make sure your tube is heading somewhere, and then your water's hooked up. Next thing we're going to do is our other boil additions and our clarifier, the WHIRLFLOC. So we've got a 5-minute addition with this kit. We're going to use that same hot bag. Put that 5-minute addition right in there, and then you also got your WHIRLFLOC tablet right here. So what this is a clarifying agent. So it binds to proteins, to heavy proteins, and then settles out. Put that in with at least 5. That doesn't go in the bag. That just goes right in the solution. Mix it in. Make sure it gets 5 minutes to break up into solution. Then after that, we'll add our last 1-minute addition. Then we're going to turn off the flame and start to chill the wort. How we're going to do that is, we'll hook it up. Your kit came with a sink adapter, so you can hook it up to your sink. Or if, depending on where you're brewing, you can hook it up to a hose as well. It's got a hose fitting on there. We're going to slowly, we want the water to spend some contact time. So we're not trying to turn the hose up to like full blast. You want it running just a little bit. The longer it's spent, they call it a heat exchanger because it actually exchanges heat. The cold water comes through, pulls that heat out, it heats itself, and then it passes that out. So in that process, generally for 5 gallons, depending on your groundwater and where you're at, so that the temperature of that groundwater, take at least 20 minutes, sometimes longer than that. So it'll take a little while to cool your wort. Once the kettle, you can touch the outside of it, and it's just slightly warm to touch, you're probably good enough to go ahead and move to our next step. So let's go ahead and see the video of everything I just talked about. Awesome. Some things to note in that with the sanitizer, there's something that say don't fear the foam. So once we mix up that sanitizer, move all the liquid out of there. There's going to be a little bit of residual foam in anything that StarSan touches. Don't worry about that. You don't have to get that out. So don't fear the foam. And then also one thing I want to mention is just watching that, it reminded me of my very first brew on the MoreBeer kit. I was brewing a blonde ale that came with the kit at that time. I forgot to add the WHIRLFLOC tablet. That was my mistake at that time. And I think even the subsequent brews after that, I missed a step or did something. Don't worry, you're still going to make beer if you forget a step. So that's one thing that I always want to say. You'll still make beer and you're going to make good beer, and that's the kind of things we learn along the way. So don't worry if you miss a step. You didn't ruin the beer. That's just something that I wanted to make sure we went over. All right, so now we've made the wort. We have wort. We're getting ready to transfer the wort to the fermenter. We've chilled it. At this point, everything that comes in contact with that wort should be sanitized. We want the lid on top of here. Make sure there's no ambient microflora making their way into the beer there, or wort, sorry. So make sure you sanitize everything, the tubing, the spigot, make sure that's all sanitized. Speaking of spigot, when we start to move the beer into the fermenter, make sure your spigot's closed. There's nothing worse than having that spigot open. You start to move wort in there, and now you've got wort on the floor. So we're going to go ahead, open the valve, move it through the sanitized tubing into the fermenter. At this point, again, everything should be sanitized. Once we've got all the wort in here, we'll go ahead, and you can do it either before or after, but we're going to want to pull a sample into our hydrometer jar here. We don't need to fill the hydrometer jar all the way up to the top. Leave about 2 inches, because when you put in that hydrometer, it's going to want to displace that liquid. And if it's filled to the top, again, you're going to get wort kind of going over. And depending on where you're at, you got a mess to clean up. So leave about 2 inches, let it drop in there. What we're going to do is go ahead and spin the hydrometer. What we're trying to do is free up any air bubbles that might be underneath here, because what this does is it uses weight to basically measure the viscosity of the liquid. And then there's these little measurements right here. And then we'll take that measurement. And that's going to be what they call your original gravity. We're going to use that later on, the original gravity and then the final gravity, to figure out the alcohol of our beer, the ABV, alcohol by volume. So we transfer the wort in there, we measure the sugars, and then we're going to add our yeast and get ready for fermentation. So your kit comes with a pack of Cali yeast. We're going to want to sanitize that pack of yeast, and even the scissors you're going to use to snip the top of it. We're going to go ahead and put that into the fermenter here. Just kind of open the top up, pitch it in there, and then shake it up. We're going to want to shake it up. That's going to do 2 things. We want to get all that yeast kind of introduced to the wort, and then we're also going to want to put a little oxygen. There's oxygen in there back into solution. When boiling, we drove off all the oxygen. As you're boiling, all the oxygen leaves it. We're going to want to mix a little bit back in with that yeast, because oxygen is key for yeast reproduction. So they're going to use that in that first 24 hours to reproduce and triple in size. Let's go ahead and check out the video, and then we'll do a Q&A break after this next video to see those steps. Awesome. All right. Do we got any questions?
Oh yeah, we got some great ones.
Cool.
I actually missed a question from beforehand. So
Okay.
there's a good question about just can you reuse the bags for both the grain and the hops?
Definitely, yeah. These are nylon bags, so they're pretty darn durable and they wash easily. I've actually used this one in 2 brew days since, and as you can see, it cleans up really nicely. Over time, after 5 or 6, you might start to get some rips in there, and then I'd replace it. They're pretty cheap, but you could definitely reuse these nylon bags.
Totally. Cool. This question you kind of answered a little bit, but we'll go through these again. So, question here is: my Star Sand creates a bubble bath. Is it okay to have bubbles on the materials, or should I wash that off first?
No, yeah, don't fear the foam. Is the saying that Star Sand says? Yeah, don't wash that off. We want that foam is okay. So
It's
yeah,
the liquid really that we don't want.
the liquid we want to get out of there. But any of the foam is totally okay. So a little bit of foam is fine.
Perfect.
Great question.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's critical because you do need to be very sanitary and clean, but
And it's so counterintuitive because
right.
I don't want to, I see foam in there. I want to get that out of there. I want to add some water and get it out, but you actually don't. So yeah, don't fear the foam.
Perfect. Another good question: how do you keep the wort sanitized while chilling? The wort chiller keeps the lid popped up.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Here's what I do, or what I used to do at home brewing a lot. I would get tinfoil and just kind of, because you can mold tinfoil and mold it around the back of the wort chiller and close that off. The good thing you have going for you is the thermal energy from the heat is pushing up, and yeah, there's bacteria all around us, but it won't, it can't go up into things, especially if there's like thermal activity. But use a little tinfoil to kind of like cover that area, and then you'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I used to do, is use tinfoil. It's really
Saran wrap,
very sanitary.
Yep. Yeah. I like tinfoil better than saran wrap because you can really form it.
Absolutely. If I have to use a garden hose. So there's a question about, is there a video on how to hook up the wort chiller? So I don't know, Vito, can you maybe put the wort chiller up to the screen here? Maybe if possible, if not.
Yeah. Try and not knock things over. So what it is they call this, I think it's just a hose pipe.
Garden hose.
Yeah, HPT, which is just hose pipe thread, garden hose. Then your kit, so it'll go right on the right on the male end of a garden hose, and make sure that gas gets in there. Or we also each kit comes with to go from the garden hose adapter to it's a standard pipe thread on most sinks. Some of the fancier sinks don't have, but most standard sinks it'll fasten on there. But for me, my sink actually didn't have that type. So what I did is I just ran my garden hose from the garage or from the backyard through the back door here, and just hooked it up right onto there. And then I collected my my hot water into a bucket, and then just there was 2 points in which I had to so I used about 10 gallons of wastewater.
Perfect. Some other good questions here. Do I need to prep my yeast in warm water first?
Yeah, so rehydrating yeast is if on this beer, you do not have to. On higher gravity beers, some of the yeast companies do recommend prepping it, which they call rehydrating the yeast. Here's my thought on that. And even at the brewery, I use dry yeast. And I think when you're using a water, if I was going to rehydrate it with water, I'd want to boil that water to try and ward off any bacteria. Then I'm also worried about introducing bacteria. So I find it better just to go ahead and pitch the yeast because there's less chances to introduce bacteria. When you hydrate it, it is healthier. It's waking it up. The nice thing about dry yeast is you have so many yeast cells. There's actually 2 to 3 times the amount of yeast that you need in one of those packets. By just dumping it in, you are going to get some yeast that are going to die essentially and not get acclimated. But you have so much cell count that it's okay. And in my mind, less risk of infecting it. So I think that's the way to go, and that's what I would recommend doing.
And I think you hit on it, Vito. The key is that under a certain gravity, right? Like the lower gravity or the lower alcohol beers, it's not as needed to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So some of the higher, if you're doing, Russian Imperial Stout or something big like that, yeah, you're going to want to rehydrate it, or get 2 packs is another way to do that too, because dry yeast is so cheap too. So that is another option. So it's like kind of weighing out, which path you want to go on.
Perfect. Another good one here is, what is the impact of not mixing the yeast with the wort? Notice that yeast packet had instructions recommending to mix with water prior. So it's kind of similar, but
Yeah, the same thing. Yeah, you want to rehydrate it. Mix it into the water, just making sure it's getting broke up. In that video, as you saw, I mixed it in. So I'm basically just using my cooled wort as my rehydration step. So making sure that that's mixing in. Some brewers too, they'll actually pull some of their wort, and rather than use water, they'll rehydrate with the wort, because that's going to be the solution that it's going into, right? So you want to acclimate it to that solution. As long as the temperature is good on your wort, you could actually, like I said, pitch that right in there, shake it up, make sure you get it all broken up. There's no yeast clumps sitting on the top, and you'll be fine.
perfect. Last question here. You're using a kitchen stove, so is a burner with propane necessary?
Not right now. What'll happen, or what happened with me, 2 things. Eventually your family's gonna, or kick you out and say, I don't want you doing that. You make a mess, of the stove. And then the other thing is the power. A propane burner has so much more power. You could get to that 170 degrees in 10 to 15 minutes if it's at full bore, which you don't want to do. So my natural progression was, moving from the stovetop to a propane burner outside. And I think that is a good step, and you'll probably do that just because it's, if you're in your kitchen, you're making a mess. It's better if you're in your driveway or backyard. You can easily hose off the ground. It's no harm, no foul at that point.
And I agree. For me, I think it was just critical also to you just get up to a boil faster, right? I think no worrying about putting a lid on or anything. Just the ability to do that saves you time. So
Yeah, it saves you time, and I mean, you're going to get a more vigorous boil too,
right,
higher power. And that's the nice thing about it, I love about this kit, is this kettle. Once you move to all grain, like we talked about earlier, will work for that as well. And you can move to a propane setup, get another kettle, or get a mash tun and build on it. And that's what I love about this high quality kettle.
Awesome. I think that is all we got right now, Vito. So I appreciate it.
Cool. All right, let's keep going. So now we've added our yeast. We've made the wort. The yeast are what makes the beer. So they're going to start doing their thing. Let's talk about where we store this fermenter. One thing we want it to be, a place free of temperature rises, spikes, and dips. So something that stays, ideally straight. 65 to 68 degrees for this yeast. Every yeast is different, but for this one, for the Cal-Ale yeast, we wanted about 65 to 68 degrees. Then we also want to keep it away from light, because the beer can get light struck. These fermenters are awesome because you can see what's going on in there, but then we also don't want the beer to get light struck too. So I think in the video, I wrap it in a t-shirt and then store it in a cool place. Some things you could do, depending on where you're at, might be I work in California here in the summertime, it gets crazy hot in the garage, so I couldn't do it in there. But like if there's a bedroom with a closet inside the house that's away from the walls, if it's really hot, you could add, you could put it in like not a bucket, but a storage container, wrap that t-shirt in like cold water and put water and ice in there to keep it at that temperature. The best tip to making great beer is controlling that fermentation temperature. One of the next steps is just being able to control that fermentation temperature to a T. But do everything you can to keep it at that 65 to 68 range, because it's going to make better beer. The higher the temp with this Cal-Ale yeast, it's going to throw esters and fusel alcohol. It's just going to not make as good a beer. So control that temperature the best you can. Fermentation is going to start. You're going to see what they call high KRAUSEN. A lot of these brewing terms are German words. So KRAUSEN is the term for that. It's going to look basically like a foam layer up top here. And it's a lot of the dead yeast and some of the proteins that are just making their way up to the top there. So once that's really cool to see. You're going to see bubbles coming through here because what happens during fermentation, the yeast produce two things, alcohol. Well, they metabolize the sugar, create alcohol, and CO2. So that CO2 is the gas that's escaping. So we'll make sure to put a little water in there, let that gas escape. Once you see the bubbles stop, fermentation's done, but the beer's not done yet. We want to give it time to clean up. There's compounds that are made during fermentation, like diacetyl, things like that, that we want to allow the yeast to clean up. So take a measurement. The cool thing about these fermenters, you got the spigot on the bottom there, so you can take a measurement using your hydrometer in your hydrometer jar. Once you have a set point for 2 to 3 days, then it's done fermenting. But again, we want to go a couple more days on that. Generally, it's done fermenting in 4 to 7 days. You could move it. That we want to go at least like 9 to 12 days. I'd say 12 to 14, honestly. Patience is a virtue when it comes to brewing. Giving it those extra couple days to clean up is well worth it. So then, yeah, once that's done, we're ready to move to the next step. So let's go ahead and see everything I just talked about in the video. Awesome. All right. So we've fermentation stopped. We've taken our measurements. We've basically got beer at this point, but there's no CO2 because it's all escaped. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next step. The first thing we're going to want to do is move the fermenter. And the reason we do that ahead of time is, and we want to move it gently. There's going to be the KRAUSEN and all that stuff. And we're going to knock some things up when we move it around. So go ahead and move it to a nice stable position, ideally up somewhere high like this on the edge of a counter, because we're going to use this spigot to move the finished beer out of there. So move it gently, let it settle, put the spigot on the edge of a shelf like that. And then we're going to start to boil the priming sugar. So we're going to use 2 cups of water and boil that, and then add the little packet of priming sugar that came with it. By boiling it, we're going to boil it for 3 to 5 minutes. That's going to do 2 things. First, we're going to dissolve the sugar. We want to make sure that makes its way in the solution. And then we're going to sanitize that water because we don't want to introduce any bacteria. While that's going, we can go ahead and mix some more sanitizer. So again, 1 ounce of Star San to 5 gallons of water. Do that in the boiling bucket or your bottling bucket, sorry, because that's where we're going to move that finished beer into. So we're going to want to sanitize that, sanitize the spigot, sanitize the tubing we're going to use in the bottling process. Again, 1 minute of contact time minimal. If you mix it and let it sit for a couple of minutes, put it to the side, that's great. We're going to keep that and keep some of that sanitizer around because we're going to want to use that at different points. Then we're also going to sanitize our bottles. Your kit didn't come with bottles, so make sure you start to collect some of those and use, make sure they're not twist top bottles. Those don't work. So we'll sanitize the bottles. And again, be sure to allow enough contact time and don't fear the foam. If there's a little foam inside here, that's okay. Let them rest upside down. Or another thing you could do is put a little tin foil over the top of each one, and then you can let them sit upright. So that's another use for tin foil. Sanitize the remaining equipment. Be sure to let it come in contact time, enough time, filling, tubing, everything like that. Then we're going to transfer the beer out of the fermenter into the bottling bucket. Let that go in the bottom. Then we're going to add the priming sugar in there. The act of the liquid being gravity fed in there is going to create like a whirlpool inside the bucket, and that's going to mix that priming sugar in there. With the priming sugar, there's still yeast, even though a majority of the yeast will settle out. It's going to be at the bottom here. There's still enough yeast in there to carbonate our beer. So we're going to be bottle conditioning these beers. As that's mixing in, I like to put tinfoil again over the top of the bucket just to stop anything from making its way in there. We'll see that in the video, I believe. So we transfer into the bottling bucket. Make sure the spigot is closed on the bucket. There's nothing worse than starting to collect into your bucket and realizing what's going on the floor. Attach the sanitized transfer tubing, add your priming sugar, and bring it on in. So let's go ahead and see the video of that process. All right, let's take a stop for another questions break. Do we have any questions?
Yes, sir, Vito. We got some great ones. I missed one earlier, so let's go to that one. So, question is, so can you use too much yeast?
Yes, you can overpitch. It has to be a lot of volumes for you to overpitch. Underpitching is more common in homebrewing. So, you know, you'll run into underpitching before you overpitch, but there is too much yeast. That is a thing, but we're talking, you know, for a 5-gallon batch, if you're adding, you know, like a couple quarts of yeast or something like that. So there is overpitching. That is a thing. But
it is a thing. And I was just going to say, I think, you know, my rule of thumb was for like lagers was pitch 4 times the amount of yeast for lagers. And so I think it's just very hard to overpitch. You definitely can, but not easy to do.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so another good question. So you said light struck. So, you know, kind of what is light struck? And then also, is occasional light okay?
Occasional light's fine. I wouldn't be, you know, so worried about it that you know, that I'm, if I turn the light on in the room and I see it, that I'm freaking out. We don't want to set the fermenter in direct sunlight or anything like that. What light struck does is it's and I'm not going to remember the compounds, but basically 2 things are produced. You have hot matter right in there, and then there's also riboflavin, I think, that when light acts in that, you'll get skunky, and I used to associate that with craft beer back in the 90s, you know, like Heineken, those bottles, because they're green, you know, that skunky taste, it makes it a little more bitter too. So there's skunky is what light struck is. So you just want to make sure you're not, you know, putting it in direct light, fermenting all the time, but a little light's not hurt you.
Perfect. So can we go longer than 14 days in the fermenter before bottling?
Yeah, for sure.
Could we go 21?
For sure, 21. There is going to be a point in which, you know, you're going to want to get it off the yeast cake, where there's something called atalysis, sitting on dead yeast, and especially on a homebrew scale, you don't have to worry about it as much. I wouldn't go, you know, more than a month on there, but when there's a lot of pressure, so like in the bigger commercial fermenters, when there's a lot of head pressure and it's pushing down on the yeast, it's going to cause them to, you know, let out all of their fluids inside them, and you get this kind of dog food flavor. The yeast starts to discolor. But yeah, 14 days, no problem. 21 days, you're okay. But you don't want to let it sit on there for, you know, probably more than a month, depending. I mean, some of the beer, you know, if it's going to take like a big barley wine or something like that, I'd go a month, no problem.
You usually get it off the yeast if you were going to do that, though, Vito, or do you leave it on?
Yeah, I'd rack over to secondary at that time. You know, if I was going to do that and let it mature in another and get it off the yeast. But from, you know, what I've seen in you know, homebrew and talking to other homebrewers and tasting beers that have sat on yeast cakes, you don't have to worry about its atalysis as much. It's better to let it sit longer than to move it faster. For sure.
I'd agree. What's the longest you have a beer at the brewery in the fermenter?
Yeah, probably. I mean, you know, like 14 days is. But again, at that point, I've got so much pressure on it. I'm worried about it a little more. Atalysis happens at a larger scale like that because every foot of liquid that you have is 3 psi of pressure pushing down on that yeast cake. So in the smaller fermenter with not much headspace or liquid above it, it's not a big thing to worry about.
Beautiful. Another good question here. What's the purpose of the water in the vent again? If we have started brewing and don't have water in the vent, would you recommend?
So the water in the vent is to create a, basically a liquid layer to not allow, air and so oxygen to make its way in, bacteria to make its way in.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's just like, there's a P-trap on a sink or something like that. So you're allowing gas to escape, but nothing to make its way into it. So it's to stop bacteria and to stop air and any outside contaminants from making its way in there.
Perfect. And we definitely would recommend to put water in there now.
Yeah. When I first started, I was doing vodka because I'm thinking, well, water could be, but water is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think, they haven't put it in yet, so I would definitely recommend to put it in now, and no reason not to add it later. It's totally fine.
Yeah, and one thing to note, like you will get, especially depending, you'll keep an eye on it. There's that line there. It'll start to evaporate.
Good call.
So make sure, you're just keeping an eye on there. If within 2 weeks, you generally won't see some evaporation, but on that 3rd week, you might start to see it. And also, depending on how vigorous your fermentation is, it could be blowing gas up there and actually spewing some of the water out the top. So keep an eye on that, especially in the first couple of days of fermentation.
Awesome. So if they're using carbonation drops, can I use the fermenter spigot right into bottles? Can I pour right into bottles with the carbonation drop in the bottle?
For sure. I love carbonation drops. I used them a lot when I was homebrewing. The reason I like them, I mean, if you're getting a good mixture with that priming sugar, theoretically, you've spread out all the sugar. But the nice thing about the bottle drops is you have that measured amount of sugar goes into each bottle. Where with say you didn't get a good mix in there, you'll get what they call bottle. You go to pop one and it had more sugar in it, so there's more carbonation in there, and it's spewing or highly carbonated, and one's not as carbonated. So bottle drops are great. I do love them.
Totally agree. Then would you recommend adding water mid fermentation to to the vent? Got it. Would you recommend adding water mid fermentation to the vent, the airlock?
Yeah, keep an eye on that. Like I said, make sure that's always topped off. There's a line on there, so make sure you're at that line. We don't want to go above it because at some point it's going to make its way back into the over the top. So we don't want to overfill it, but we do want to make sure there's enough water to where the the little trap is completely submerged.
And then clean it, right? If it gets dirty.
Yeah, that's one, and that will probably, depending. I mean, this pale ale probably won't ferment as great, but if you're doing a barley wine or something like that, you'll start to get, yeast might push its way. The nice thing about these, I believe they're 7.5 gallons, so you've got tons of headspace. So you shouldn't run into that problem. But especially when I started, I was using like little 5-gallon glass carboys and things like that, and they just don't have as much headspace. So you'll get yeast up inside there. Just try your best to clean it, get it back on there, as quickly as possible. Maybe put some tinfoil over the top. But it's better to clean that out and allow it to function as it's designed to allow gas than to leave that muck in there, and it could clog up. And then what will happen is if it clogs up, that gas has nowhere to escape. And that's not good.
Exactly. I may have had that happen once or twice.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Vito. That's all the questions we got.
Cool. Great questions. All right. So, we've got our finished beer mixed in the sugar. So now we're going to go ahead and attach the bottle filler, which is this little guy right here. And it fits right on the end of the bottling bucket. Just kind of slaps right on there. So that's really cool. And basically what there is a little spring in there that allows for, once it's engaged and pushed in, liquid to make its way out. So you could, put one bottle, pull it off, and you won't have any beer going everywhere. Open the spigot, obviously, to allow liquid to flow through there. What I like to do is we need to get our final gravity reading. So go ahead and fill your hydrometer jar first to get you used to filling using that little spring actuator there. All right, so that's our bottling. Attach the bottle filler. Move the bottling bucket up attach the sanitizer. Again, we want to sanitize everything. At this point, we want to make sure anything that's touching the finished beer is sanitized. Make sure your workflow is convenient and good reach, because as you fill these bottles, you're going to want to cap them shortly thereafter, if not immediately. It's great to have a friend or your spouse or someone around, or even a child is great to help out on that. So as you fill them, then you can pass it off to the next person, put the cap on, and then your kit came with this capper. So there's a magnet in here to hold the cap on top, and then put it on and just kind of push it down. It'll feel like you start to hit a point and then you go a little bit past that. So we'll fill the bottles, purge. We're going to want to fill all the way up to the top of the lid. And the reason being is that bottling wand that's inside there is displacing liquid. So as we pull it out, you're going to have some headspace in there. And if you fill it all the way to the top, you're going to get a perfect fill that'll finish right about there. So fill the bottles, open the spigot, purge the air, take the sample. Then we're going to fill those and then cap the bottles. So center the bottle cap right on the top, press down on both handles. There'll be a round little dimple in there. If you did it good, it's good to have a helper, like I said. Then rinse off the bottles, because you might get some liquid on there, and put them aside. We're going to take our measurement for our final gravity. So take that hydrometer reading, and then we're going to calculate. So it's in this calculation, you don't have to remember this, but it's OG minus FG, so original gravity minus final gravity, times 131, and that's going to equal your estimated ABV. And on your kit or the recipe sheet, it has that formula, plus it has the areas to take those notes. And that's a good point. The key to making good beer is good note taking. So make sure you're writing down, at least at a bare minimum, your OG, final gravity, temperature of the fermentation. I mean, anything, taking good notes is great to reproducing that same beer over and over again. I even write down what music I was listening to that day, things like that. Just make sure you take good notes. Once we have our ABV, or we know our ABV, now we're going to put these in a temperate place that's not going spiking high and low, ideally cellar temp, so around 65 degrees, even 58's okay. We don't want it super high in the 70s. Let them sit for a while. And then what I like to do is take one of them, pop it in the refrigerator, let it sit for at least 12 hours to cool down, crack it open and see where the carbonation level's at. Once the carbonation level is at, hey, this is where I like it, it's nice and fizzy, then go ahead and either put all of them into a refrigerator if you can, or because what's going to happen, they'll continue to carbonate. You'll hit a point where it's just not going to get any more CO2 into solution. But once you hit the carbonation point you're at, put it in the fridge, and then you're ready to enjoy your first beer. So let's go ahead and check out the video on that, and then we'll do another Q&A step. Awesome. So as the video said, about 30 days, give or take, 3 weeks, 4 weeks before you're enjoying that first beer. So in that time, I like to brew my second one, because then, that pipeline, you want to make sure that's filled. But let's go ahead and answer some questions.
Let's do it. So first question is 70 to 72 degrees inside temperature okay for the bottling?
For bottling, sure. Yeah, that's okay because we've already had primary fermentation. It's a little high, but all we're trying to do is get CO2 that's trapped inside that bottle. So it's not the end of the world if you're at a higher temp at that point in time.
Agreed. 68's ideal, but not a problem.
Yeah.
How long for carbonation? I've had trouble with not having the beer carbonate.
Yeah, definitely. You know, at least 2 weeks, like it says in the video there. That's what we say. I wouldn't touch it before 14 days, probably. I've had it take even longer than that, depending. And again, that comes down to, yeah, how much sugar is in there, how much yeast is still in suspension in there. So you could have, you know, it might take you a little longer than that, but at a bare minimum, at least 2 weeks. I wouldn't crack a beer before then.
I'd agree, and I think a couple of things there too are like the longer you let the beer sit on the yeast, there's not going to be the yeast is going to be a little more dormant, so that's a potential thing. And then also, I've had people that have boiled the corn sugar and then introduced the boiling liquid into the bottling bucket, and then have killed the yeast. So just be careful of your temperatures whenever there's yeast around. It's critical to not go too high or too low.
Definitely, great question.
I think that is it. I think we got two more questions here. So, is there an optimal way to dry hop in the primary fermenter after I confirm that fermentation is done?
Yeah, definitely. Optimal. So what I like to do is add my hops directly into the fermenter. You know, kind of mix them in a little. They will settle out. If you have access to like an old refrigerator, you can do what they call cold crashing to get those hops out of solution, or make their way down so they're not just floating in there. Some other people, they'll add them in a bag to kind of keep it, you know, together. You won't get as much hop aroma and hop utilization out of your dry hop, so you can counter that by adding a little bit more, you know, depending on the amount of dry hops you want in there. But yeah, simply adding them, you know, straight into the top or in a bag. We also sell some stainless steel little units,
hop canisters,
which then will sink and make their way in there. And kind of, again, you kind of want to kind of stir it up to mix that around in there. But yeah, you dry hopping is definitely, and you know, as an IPA lover, that's a key to making a great IPA is a good copious dry hop.
And I think you hit on it. I think bagging the hops for a lot of like at least you beginner brewers, especially on those big IPAs where you got so many hops going on, that bagging it almost makes it easier on yourself. So
yeah, you don't want to put 6 ounces just in there and now it's just kind of floating. Now you've got you know, hops are great, but you don't want to actually be sucking on hop particulates themselves. They're very bitter.
Right. So, you know, when you take off the top of your, you know, fermenter, that 20 seconds or so, is that going to ruin your beer due to the oxygen coming in?
The oxygen, I'm glad you said oxygen, because that's the thing I'd worry about more than getting an infection at that point, because the good thing about beer is it's actually, you know, low pH and there's alcohol in there. So once you've made beer, I'm not as worried about an infection, but I am worried about oxygen. Oxygen could strip your hop aromas and your hop flavors off pretty quick. And then that'll lead to that staling, that paper, that wet cardboard taste. So, you know, ideally, like at the brewery, what I do when I dry hop is I'm pumping CO2 through the bottom. So that's blowing its way up. So I've got passive CO2 pushing through. I mean, you could do that. And I did do that at home brewing, but that's a little more advanced. But yeah, just try and be as quick as possible. The nice thing is CO2 is heavier than oxygen. So, you know, during fermentation, we've got a layer of CO2 that's sitting up here. So as long as you're not pushing it around or you know, or moving air around, that CO2 should kind of sit there and you know, keep a barrier. Once you add those hops, those dry hops, you're going to get a little re-fermentation because hops have sugars and they have enzymes on them. And then that re-fermentation is going to push off more CO2 and purge any oxygen you might have introduced in that time. So just be quick. You know, try and not introduce oxygen after you dry hop. And then this is one thing that a lot of brewers are talking about. There's something called hop creep. So make sure you do give it a couple more days to clean up. You don't want to put the hops in there, then 2 days later move over to packaging and start bottling it, because over a while you'll start to get you'll get some diacetyl from that, and that can lead to an unpleasant beer.
And I think the key is, like, it's not going to ruin the beer, right? For opening you got to add the dry hops. So open it, do it as quick as possible, put them in, and then shut it up. I've made award-winning beer without worrying about that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's Dave hit the nail on the head. There's an old thing, Charlie Papazian, what they call him the godfather of beer. He's the one who lobbied to make it legalized in 1978. He's like, relax, don't worry, have another homebrew, is his saying. And that's, in myself, I worry about everything. I want to try, but you're going to make beer, you're going to make good beer. Worrying about those steps will get you to making great beer. So don't not worry, but
absolutely
don't worry to the extent that you're like, oh, I ruined this beer, it's got to go down the drain. No, it's going to be a great beer that you can enjoy and your friends are going to enjoy. And I know myself, biggest critic, but your friends are going to love the beer regardless. That's just the best beer is free beer, and if they're coming over to get free beer, then they're going to love you.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So this is another good question that's kind of so I recently had a temperature swing outside. This person lives in Florida. It was during fermentation. They caught the carboy temperature at 74 degrees and brought it down to the upper 60s. Do you think this will give you any off flavors, banana or whatever? They did use a Verdant IPA yeast, and they said it's 73 degrees is the high end of temperature.
With that strain, with the Verdant strain, which is a newer strain, but it's an English strain, and at those higher temperatures, you're going to actually get some what they call esters. So you're going to get pineapple, mango, some fruity flavors that for depending on what you're trying to make, like for hazy IPAs, those are actually great flavors. So some of those New England style beers, New England IPAs, fermenting a little warmer is actually better.
Totally.
There is a point in which too high, you'll start to get fusel alcohols, which are like nail polish remover, but that's up in the high 70s. And then also depending on when you caught it, those first 24 to 48 hours is when a lot of the fermentation is. So if it was like day 3 and it was that higher temp, I wouldn't even worry about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that initial couple days that's the most critical for sure. Awesome. I think we got a couple more here. So this person makes gluten-free beer, and Vito, we obviously need more gluten-free kits, so that's a problem we got to work on.
Yeah, no, and great. I actually just worked with a gentleman to write a gluten-free article for our website. He's a award-winning gluten-free homebrewer that we're going to be publishing here in the next couple of days, and we are working on more gluten-free kits for our website. There is check out the article. It's going to be online in a couple of days, but there is things you could use depending on your gluten intolerance level. Some people with celiac disease cannot have any gluten, but there is it's an enzyme, Clarity Firm, from White Labs, that you could use to reduce the gluten of beer greatly, to where if you're somewhat gluten intolerant, you'll be completely fine. But if you're, if you have celiac disease, you need to be truly gluten-free.
Exactly.
So yeah, we're working on getting more gluten-free kits, gluten-free, millet, all the grains for doing all grain, gluten-free batches too. So that's something we're definitely exploring and understand that.
No, it's cool that we're experimenting and trying to do more of it, and then people are asking about it. So it's great.
Yeah, the guy who wrote the article, Kale, they have an online homebrew club called it's Gluten Intolerance or Zero Intolerance. Yeah, so check them out. They're on Facebook. They have a website.
What is it again, Vito? What's the name?
God, I'm forgetting the name.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said it. My bad.
It's got a funny name, like Zero Tolerance. That's it. Sorry, Zero Tolerance. Because gluten free. Yeah, so it's called Zero Tolerance.
Cool. Awesome. So when is our all grain video going to be done, Vito?
Well, I'm brewing tomorrow at the brewery. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think we could talk for 2 seconds real quick about all grain. I think, the cool part about all grain is that everything you just saw that Vito presented to you is relevant, right? I think, in all grain brewing, we just have a couple steps beforehand, and then everything you just showed is the same steps. And that's what's cool.
Yeah, so this malt extract that we use, that is like everything that producing this is all grain brewing. So everything past adding this is all the same. So everything you learn today about brewing is relevant, and all the equipment works as well. So there's just a couple more steps on the front side. And all grain brew days about 6 hours, so double the time, but you have a little more control over the flavors, the amount of grains you want to use, and things like that. And I said it in the beginning, and I throw it out there. I don't know if you want to add my email or anybody, but if you have questions about moving to all grain, I'd love to chat about it. Our customer service team as well. So that's we're here to help on those kind of questions. And that's a natural progression. I did extract brewing I probably went a lot longer than most people, like maybe 5-6 months, and then I moved to all grain. Did that by starting with brew in a bag, and then moved up to a 3-tier system. So it's just that's the fun of brewing is you're making something that you can enjoy with friends, and there's like the gadget element too that's part of it, or maybe the equipment side. So it's a really fun hobby that I remember telling my wife at the time, oh, we're going to save money, I'm not going to buy as much beer, but you start to buy more equipment and things like that. And I guess over the course of if you brew for 10 years, yeah, maybe that's true, but it's really just about,
it tends to be a lot of fun, right, Vito?
Yeah, exactly. As you can see, I mean, like I give my life to it. I stopped my corporate job, and I love brewing. I mean, it's a fun hobby that you could share with others. And not many hobbies you could do that with.
Right.
I loved cooking. It's very similar to cooking. Making flavors for other people to enjoy.
Right. So the one thing I kind of noticed we didn't cover too much is when you have like your gravity's either too low or too little, or you didn't get enough liquid in your fermenter. So I don't know, maybe in a quick couple seconds, touch on that for people like in that situation.
One of the things, so if you didn't have enough liquid into the fermenter, your gravity reading is going to probably be higher, meaning
Exactly.
either boiled off too much or we didn't start with enough volume. So you could actually add, and with this kit, you're able to do full boils where we're starting with the full amount of water. But our other kits, we have a smaller kettle, and they call that a partial boil. So you're adding water back in to top up to hit your final volume. The advantage of that is that you could use that cold water to cool the wort, so it helps out on that side. And then you could adjust to get back up to your gravity level. So adding water is totally fine. A full boil and not adding water, because when you're adding water, the good thing is also you have oxygen in that water, so some of that water. But then what if there is contaminants in that water and things like that? You add it in, and then also with a full boil, the hops and the sugars they spend more time melding, and you get better hop utilization, better flavors. When you cut it, it's just like cutting anything. If you take some orange juice and you cut it with a little water, it kind of changes the flavor. So a full boil is ideal, but if your gravity is too high and you need to cut it, or hit that volume, you could add water back in, no problem.
Perfect. Well, last not but least, how does someone get a job at a brewery, Vito?
That's a great question. What I start just asking, meet brewers. One thing I highly recommend is join a homebrew club. Homebrew club is going to you meet once a month, generally, depending on the club.
How many pro brewers are in our homebrew club, Vito? Or how many were home brewers that went now to pro brewing?
In the 11 years, or I joined Doe's, which is the local homebrew club, about 10 years ago. And in that time, I think there's been 8 brewers that have gone pro. But then there was even a couple before that. And you'll start to meet brewers. And then volunteering, I bet, is basically what I started doing. Just like, hey, can I come down and help you brew this one day? And anybody's always okay with free labor, right?
Right.
So there's that. And then you can do internships. It's the one good thing is there's always work to be had in the brewery, and it's fun work, and it's great fulfilling, but it doesn't pay the best. Brewers don't make a ton of money, so you don't go into it for money, you go into it for the love. But just talking to a brewery, they're always willing. Most brewers, and that's the great thing. It's such an awesome community. They want to tell you how to make better beer. They want to give you yeast. they'll give you some of their hops, things like that. So just talking to brewers, knocking on their door, send them an email. Generally 9 times out of 10, brewers are great people that want to share, their passion and love for brewing as well. And, and 9 times out of 10, they all started as home brewers. Most brewers I know started with home brewing, and then went to brewing school and went that path. But, getting a job at a brewery, just kind of knocking on doors, getting some experience.
And I think you also said it too. There are brewing schools out there that will also help you become more educated and more marketable out in the job field for breweries. So
yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, join a homebrew club. To me, that was in my brewing career. That's when once a month I was meeting with other brewers and just striking that. I left those meetings with fervor to brew my next batch, and start networking, things like that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think the home brewing club is essential. That you just meet so many, not only people that are already professional brewers, just so many people that are passionate about brewing, and you're going to naturally be in that community, talking with other home brewers. You're naturally going to find some pro brewers along the way that you're going to get to communicate with. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, check out AHA, the American Homebrewers Association, has all the brew clubs. So you can check your area to see if there's a brew club in your area. With COVID, a lot of them, my club included, have gone online, and we're doing monthly Zoom meetings just like this. So it's easy that. There's also the Brewing Network, which does a podcast, and they have an online homebrewing club that you could join too. So there's, even if there's not a homebrewing club in your area, there's so many online resources to exchange ideas and chat with people.
Awesome. Well, wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. It was awesome having everyone on here. And like Vito said, we have a great customer service team. My team's always there to talk. We have some very knowledgeable brewers that love to sit down and talk about brewing, so don't hesitate to give us a call. And then I'm available, and Vito's available. We love what we do. We're here to help, so don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time. Appreciate the questions. They were great. Look forward to chatting with you all.